Hello, merhaba. My name is Marietje Schaake and I'm a member of the European Parliament for the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe. Here in the Parliament I serve on the committees dealing with foreign affairs, international trade and culture and education. My work focuses on human rights, fundamental freedoms, new technologies and European policies with regard to our neighbourhood, especially Turkey. And I've often had the pleasure of visiting the country, so I'm particularly sorry I cannot join you in person today at this symposium on the rule of law in Turkey. But I'm glad to be able to share some of my thoughts with you through this video message. While the world's and European eyes have been focused on the Ukrainian crisis, in Turkey, divisions that remained below the surface for a long time erupted at the end of last year. These polarizations will not easily be solved. The current crisis knows only losers. First and foremost, the Turkish population and their aspirations for democracy and an open and free society based on respect for human rights and the rule of law. And I want to focus on what the European Union can and should do. My fundamental premise in answering that question has been and will be that the EU needs to have the well-being of the Turkish population as a priority. That is why I've supported accession for years, despite a lacking popular support for that in Europe. Relations between Turkey and the EU have become strained over the past years and particularly since the crackdown on protests last summer. On the one hand, Turkey has blamed the EU for not taking the accession process seriously and for blocking progress on important chapters. On the other hand, the worsening human rights situation has added questions about Turkish eligibility to join the EU amongst many in Europe. The fundamental crisis which the Turkish state finds itself in has joined critics and supporters of Turkey's accession in wondering about the desirability and especially the feasibility of accession. The Prime Minister's belief in conspiracy theories pointing to interference from the international community or financial markets have underlined the extent to which our visions differ. Despite strained relations, however, it would only help those who seek to undermine the rule of law to give up. Turkey and the EU cannot afford to just drift away from each other. Especially under current conditions, the EU must do all it can to help Turkey steer towards respect for fundamental freedoms and human rights, as the regime, in its attempts to silence opponents and critics, is further trampling them. The accession talks remain an important vehicle to work towards reforms in Turkey. By opening negotiating chapters 23 and 24 on the judiciary and fundamental rights and justice, freedom and security, the EU can engage systematically. We need to be able to address specific problems such as laws which give intelligence services unprecedented powers, laws that restrict free expression or that further undermine the separation of powers. We must show commitment, even in and especially in these challenging days. For too long, the relations have been exclusively government to government, and they must be broadened. But still, with or without the opening of chapters 23 and 24, the AK party government should take responsibility and repair the rule of law starting today. We also need to look at other possibilities besides the accession talks. I've suggested to launch an independent international inquiry into the rule of law in Turkey. The different parties are now so entrenched they cannot find a way out on their own. The mistrust and polarization run so deep that only an independent assessment will be trusted. And under the leadership of the EU, such an expert investigation could be set up by the international community. I've also called for an election observation mission for the upcoming presidential elections. Given the fundamental disagreements in the aftermath of the local elections, the EU needs to show its dedication to free and fair elections and upholding the rule of law and the fundamental aspects of democracy. It should be underlined that such missions are upon invitation from a government. it should also be very, very clear that democracy is more than one man, one vote, and involves governance based on democratic principles and democratic institutions. Violations of human rights, such as blocking free speech and constricting press freedoms, must have consequences in actions from the EU. We cannot remain silent as Turkey continues to step away from the Copenhagen criteria. At the same time, we cannot forget that there are other bonds between the EU and Turkey. We have a shared responsibility in NATO, and we share strategic interests in an increasingly fragile and unstable Middle East. And on top of that, there are trade relations and economic benefits of the customs union, as well as many European citizens with Turkish roots. The many interests we share should form the basis of a values-based discussion in which Europe should show more leadership and make explicit what it expects from Turkey. I have the impression clear and stern language is understood by the Prime Minister. Now, I hope that you will have a fruitful conference, and I look forward to continuing the conversation about the rule of law in Turkey online and hopefully in person next time I'm in Istanbul. Thank you.